Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the A Native Student in Research webinar for the Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health, also known as KERCA. My name is Wyatt Pickner, and I am Hunkpati Dakota and a research associate for the Center for Health Outcomes and Prevention Research, a member of the Methodology Core for KERCA, and a recent graduate from the University of South Dakota with a bachelor's degree in American Indian Studies and Health Sciences. This presentation is being recorded for future use. These slides will be available on our website for future reference at www.kerca.org. Also, currently we have everyone on mute or lecture mode. And then for the Q&A portion, we will unmute your lines for questions, and we'll hold all questions until the end, but feel free to type in your questions into the text box at any time. Today I want to talk about why research is important, specifically in Native populations and communities. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to effectively address each of these objectives. Define research, identify different types of research, discuss research history with Native populations, and have an understanding for the need of culturally appropriate research. Throughout the presentation, you will have the opportunity to reflect on a few questions and are encouraged to write down any responses for your own reference. In order to talk about why research is important, we must first define what research is. Take a second and think about how you would define research. What thoughts and ideas do you have that you feel make up research? This is one definition of research. In less technical terms, what this means is that research is a process used to answer a question. Research is all around us, but in some cases, it's just more structured and formal. For instance, think about today. Has there been an instance where you began a thought with, "I wonder"? That's where it all starts, and following up that question with a search for an answer is research. These are the basic steps of a general research process. Start by coming up with a good question. Work to design the study. Collect data and information. Use that information to test your hypothesis. Form a conclusion based on your results. And lastly, share your results. I wanted to start by providing that definition and overview because personally I did not fully understand the field of research. Rather, I only had a few ideas in mind of what it meant. So next I'd like to provide my journey in research and how I was able to get where I am today. I was never 100% sure on what I wanted to be when I grew up. In elementary, I had many of the ambitions most children have of being an astronaut, lawyer, and of course a doctor. As I continued through school, I took interest in architecture, chemistry, math, physics, and many others. Although, again, I never really had a set goal. I just did my best at what was in front of me at the time and went from there. Even going into college, I was undecided. However, I did now have a growing interest in healthcare as many of my family and role models worked in that field. The first major I declared was American Indian Studies as a result of my first semester classes. It did not take long for me to add a second major, which had many name changes, but in the end was Medical Laboratory Sciences. When I decided to double major, there were many who were confused because I was getting a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Arts. Two completely different fields of study. It was at this point that I began to realize what I wanted to be when I grew up, and it was to bridge those two areas of study together. I wanted to do something in healthcare while working with Native communities, since there's such a high need, and I could certainly relate to the population and provide a unique perspective on new approaches to improve the health of American Indians. After I had determined my area of study, I still needed to figure out the context in which I wanted to apply my education to my career. I received guidance and encouragement to apply for internships. One of the best ways to figure out if you're going to like doing something is to actually do it. Two programs that helped me to become aware of my interests and push me to get experience were the Sanford Summer Undergraduate Research Experience and the MCHC Rise Up program through Kennedy Krieger and the CDC. I worked on various projects, from a molecular analysis project on triple-negative breast cancer to epidemiology with breast cancer and emergency department use and care in American Indian children. I had learned about SURE when program staff had an informational session at USD. They asked about my interests and my career goals. As I mentioned, I was still trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. At the time, I was in medical laboratory science and saw myself working in the clinical setting. However, after hearing more about research, I began to realize that it fit my interest areas better. Then, after my first year with SURE, I actually switched my major to health sciences to fit research. From there, I began learning more about research in the different areas. I took an interest in public health and saw it as an opportunity to help others to prevent problems from occurring. This made so much sense to me. Why go through the struggles with illness and disease if it can be prevented, or at least held off as long as possible? It was at this point that I applied to the Rise Up program, was accepted, and really started learning about the extensive field of public health. Every year that I continued to participate in research, I was learning something new and gaining more experience. Each project I worked on was a building block for the next year. The projects I worked on varied in design and topic, and so I was able to gain not just general research skills, but also some specific ones. More specific skills were dependent on the project I was working on. My first project was on the bench intensive. The focus was to figure out if specific proteins would localize in a specific place in cancer cells. Majority of my time was spent in the lab doing experiments and taking pictures of cells with the microscope. The second project was a combination between experiments in the lab and data analysis at my desk. I worked to identify the status of triple-negative breast cancer and BRCA1 mutations in Native Americans of the Northern Plains. My last and current project has been on emergency department use and care in American Indian children. This was again doing data analysis with a very large data set. I've also helped to lead focus group discussions, and then I would transcribe the recordings and do qualitative analysis on the discussions. I want to refer back to the research process I mentioned earlier to show what my steps look like for one of my projects. So my second year in SURE, I was able to develop my own research project. I started by asking a question about how often a specific type of breast cancer occurred within native populations of the Northern Plains. Next, I had to find out what has already been researched, so I knew how to design my study. For any research that is done, it's always good to find out what's already out there on the topic, and a literature review is the best way to do that. I then worked to gather data about tumor characteristics involved with triple-negative breast cancer. From there, I used the data to answer the questions I had and form conclusions. I then needed to share my results. One way to tell others about any work you're doing is to present at conferences. With the opportunities I've had, I was able to present at numerous local, regional, and national conferences. With this project, I was accepted to present at a research symposium in my hometown and was also accepted at a large national conference in Alaska and California. Submitting a manuscript for publication is another way to share results and can be a lengthy process, but a major component of research. My first year with the SURE program resulted in a publication which took over a year to be reviewed and accepted. I'm also currently working on submitting a paper for publication as a result of my breast cancer project. There is definitely a significant amount of work that goes into all of these steps, but in the end, it's all worth it. So now I've discussed the different types of projects I have worked on and some of the different components or types of research, but want to expand a little bit more. Earlier I had mentioned that when I was first exposed to the world of research, I had only an idea of what I thought it meant, only to find out it was so much more than that. There is a variety of research studies that may be happening all around you, and you're not even aware of it. The areas I've been exposed to include the following. Basic research, also known as on the bench. This can be a wet lab where you're working with chemicals and specimens in a controlled setting and has a focus of study that's on a cellular or molecular level, working to understand the underlying mechanism of illness and disease. One example is trying to understand the behavior of cancer. This was part of my first project. Clinical research is working with human subjects and or human material such as tissue samples or specimens from patients in a clinical setting with a goal to improve the care in that setting for a patient. This can be used to explore various treatment options and therapies for illness and disease and how they affect humans and their body. An example could be using tissue samples to identify the presence of proteins that affect cancer. This was a portion of my second project. Public health is more community-oriented, looking to protect and improve the health of groups of people. This is usually done through promoting healthy lifestyle choices and working to find solutions to health issues that can be prevented. One section within public health is behavioral and psychological areas, which includes studies behaviors, lifestyles, and thinking of individuals or groups of people. For example, one study might look at how healthy lifestyles affect the likelihood of type 2 diabetes. My experience with public health and behavioral psychological research has been my involvement in the emergency department study. We're trying to find out how American Indian children are using the emergency department and what kind of problems exist so that the care for those children can be improved. So overall, research is a very broad topic, and there are many other types and designs not covered here. Also, in many instances, one study may involve multiple types of research. It's possible for a study to have basic clinical and public health components. However, before I was able to start any of these projects, I had to learn about some of the history of research, and I'm very glad that I did, because in all areas of research, the information that is gathered and generated needs to be protected and handled properly. When research is not handled properly, there are negative consequences. There are some examples of research studies that were not handled properly. During World War II, there were experiments done that were harmful and deadly through exposure to chemicals and hazardous environments. These experiments were highly unethical, and the researchers were put on trial after the war. The Stanley Milgram's experiment was a social psychology study that was used to study obedience to an authority figure. Participants thought they were shocking another participant, but it was an actor. The participant did not know they were the one actually being studied. The Tuskegee syphilis study was a 40-year project that began in 1932 and promised 400 men free treatment for bad blood. However, the treatment was never given to the men and was actually withheld from them. Even after a cure was found, they did not receive treatment. The Willowbrook study was conducted from 1963 to 1966 and involved children diagnosed with mental retardation. The children were deliberately infected with the hepatitis virus. The purpose was to study the progression of the illness and was when left untreated. These are all examples that have been influential to research ethics and the development of policies and procedures in conducting research on human subjects. From these experiences, there was a call for action to protect those involved in research. The Nuremberg Code is a set of research ethical principles for human experimentation set as a result of the subsequent Nuremberg trials at the end of the Second World War. The Declaration of Helsinki is another set of ethical principles that was developed by the World Medical Association to be followed when conducting human subjects research. The Belmont Report is yet another set of ethical principles to follow with human subjects. This was developed by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research in 1976. The development and implementation of institutional review boards began in 1966, and IRBs now base reviews off the Belmont Report. IRBs are aimed to make independent determination of the rights and welfare of the individual or individuals involved, determination of the appropriateness of the methods used to secure informed consent, and determination of the risks and potential medical benefits of the investigation. This process has various requirements that must be met in order to be approved and helps to hold researchers accountable for their actions. I feel that it is absolutely necessary to understand the history of research with any community or population. As research produces information, and while it may be a researcher who writes it down, it still belongs to someone and needs to be treated with respect. Also, it is very important to recognize that bad experiences have happened, and it's critical to learn from it and work to ensure that it doesn't happen again. After learning some of the history of research, I definitely became more vigilant to the whole research process. Next, we need to understand the history of research within American Indian communities. So, just like the studies from the previous slides, Native communities have had many negative experiences with research. However, there are also some good experiences. There are more than 500 recognized tribal nations, and each has its own experience to be considered. These are some experiences in Native communities I wanted to mention because there are people who have used research in a bad way and resulted in a negative effect on the community that it took place in. Research was being conducted on a hantavirus outbreak in 1993, and during the investigation, information surfaced that the first victims were Navajo. This led to misperception that the illness was linked to Navajos and became known as the Navajo flu. Even though this was not an experimental study, the way the information was handled highlights the point of protecting populations. Identifying a specific group in relation to a topic that generates fear can cause that group several problems. In the early 1980s, the Nuchanuth Nation of the Pacific Northwest was selected for an arthritis study. The actual study process went as planned. However, afterwards, there was no communication between researchers and participants. The principal investigator accepted a new position, and the community was told there were no significant findings. Although in the years to come, the same blood samples were used for various other studies around the world without the consent of the community or participants. These included human migration research, HIV/AIDS, and drug abuse research. The samples were eventually returned to the community after the principal investigator had died, but damage had already been done. The Havasupai people live in a remote location in the Grand Canyon and have high rates of type 2 diabetes. In 1989, the Havasupai tribe and Arizona State University began working together to address the problem. The project included components of health education, collection and analysis of blood samples, as well as a genetic testing for risk for diabetes. However, issues arose when the blood samples were used for studies on schizophrenia, migration, and inbreeding. A lawsuit was filed against ASU and eventually settled with the samples returned to the community, but again, the damage had already been done. The Barrow alcohol study is another research study not handled correctly. Native leaders and city officials in Barrow, Alaska, were concerned with drinking and the relationship to violence and accidental deaths. In order to get a better understanding, researchers were invited to find out what was going on and develop solutions. However, after the study was completed, a report titled "The Inuit Economics and Alcohol on the Alaskan North Slope" was released simultaneously at a press release and to the Barrow community. The New York Times picked up the press release and ran a front-page story titled "Alcohol Plagues the Eskimos." Again, this information was not shared with the community it affected prior to being released to the public and resulted in a negative stigma. These were all experiences I never knew about prior to my research experience, but once I did learn, I felt that it was incredibly important to know about, especially being a Native researcher. Again, each tribe and community has different experiences and different lessons learned. Simply having knowledge about what doesn't work can save a group or community hardship and stigma. Now that you've heard a little bit about some of the negative experiences, take a moment to think about what you think needs to be in place so that individuals involved in research are protected. Are there things that could have been done differently by researchers or the community? When working with a specific population such as this, there is a need for added protection, not just for individuals participating, but the community as a whole. The research that occurs in Native communities today must be reviewed and approved by an IRB, usually through the institution the principal investigator is working at. In most cases, tribal IRB and/or tribal government review and approval is needed. Although, as I mentioned, each tribe has its own experience and therefore is at its own level in the development of research infrastructure. Many research studies have a component called a community advisory board that is made up of a group that is representative of those participating in the study. The group is to review various components of the study and provide feedback. The purpose of a community advisory board is to get a better understanding of the community and provide awareness of proper protocols. With more tribes being involved in some form of research, there is more encouragement for tribes to do their own research. There have been many positive research experiences in Native communities as well. Unfortunately, it's not usually the good ones you hear about as much. The Fort Peck community began working with Montana State University in 2006 to develop an IRB, Community Advisory Board, and various other trainings on research. The project title is Ceremony of Research and aimed to look at research as a ceremony. There is a video on YouTube that provides a great overview of the project, and I encourage you to watch it for more information. My journey through research has exposed me to Kirka, which is a very large project that is not only working with more than a few tribes on numerous research studies, but is also helping to build the research infrastructure and capacity within the community so that they can develop their own research and have the knowledge and ability to approve research done within their community. The project is still ongoing, but from my experience has exemplified appropriate research methods. Even though there are good experiences, there are still obstacles to overcome before a determination on a relationship or experience as positive or negative can be made. What do you think could be some things that might prevent research from occurring within a Native population? Think about some of the experiences we've talked about. Another way to think about this question is, what would you expect others to consider when working with your community or your family members so that the outcome is positive? These are a few examples. Historical trust issues. We talked some about the history of research in Native communities, but there's also a long history with the government and working with other races that should be considered. Conflicting beliefs, values, and protocols. Many times in our everyday lives, we find differences among each other on what we think, do, believe, and value. So when it comes to working with a different population that may have a different point of view, there is a barrier that needs to be overcome and an understanding and common ground reach if work is to be done. Lack of Native student researchers, or lack of Native researchers. Currently, the number of Native researchers is low, and so the amount of insight provided is limited, and therefore research within this population. If you don't understand the community and the problems that exist there, it only frustrates both the community and the researchers. Language. There are two language barriers that can create problems. The first is when advanced reading level terminology and research terminology that many may not be familiar with is used. Secondly is when there are two different languages being used, such as English and Lakota. Full understanding of the concepts, ideas, and plans of a study may not be achieved. Additionally, some English words do not exist in some traditional languages, and further misinterpretation can occur. Study results framed negatively. Again, past history with research has proven that if information is not structured in a positive manner and presented carefully, it could negatively impact a community and create a stereotype or stigma. With all the work that is required to do research and do it well, you might wonder why it's important. First is there are some research studies that involve Native populations, but oftentimes their representation is too low to make conclusions, and serious problems can be overlooked. As you may already know and possibly have experienced within your own families, there are major health concerns among many Native communities. This is not true for every tribe or community, but for those that it is true, a need also exists for proper education on those health topics, and research can assist in finding out what works and what doesn't. So how can you help? What can you do? You can bring a perspective of cultural knowledge and understanding from your community to the world of research. There is a different perspective or way of thinking that is important to follow in many Native communities. This is especially important if your community experiences significant health problems but does not have the resources to address those problems. As a Native person, we both can provide a better understanding of how a community operates or what the norm is. Overall, it's really being that bridge that connects a community with the world of research. So where do we go from here? Currently, and this is in general, more diversity is needed in research. Communication is huge and needs to continue to expand between researchers and the communities where problems exist. And there is definitely still a need to develop the research infrastructure and capacity in many communities. Before, it's been that there were Native experts who knew all about the Native populations, but we need to get to a point where it's that we have expert Natives who have the proper education and can provide what is asked of by their community. If research is something you're interested in or currently working in, there are a few things I have learned that are very important to remember. First, always put the community or population you work with first. Be patient. Meaningful work can take some time. Always be respectful of those you're working with. The relationship you have with others is critical, and the way you present yourself and interact with others will impact the work you do. Remember that the community is helping you too, and that it's not just that you're there to help them. And don't be afraid to ask who is benefiting from this. I know that this can all seem overwhelming, especially for those just starting to become involved in research, but there is strong reason to do this kind of work. Also remember, this doesn't all happen overnight. I've been doing this for almost 4 years and still have so much to learn. So everything might not happen all at once. So again, patience is key. Second is that there will be guidance, support, and mentorship. However, don't be afraid to reach out and find a mentor who is working on a topic that interests you. Taking the initiative to ask questions goes a long ways and can lead to great opportunities. Most importantly, always remember your initial goal. What is the one overall goal that you strive to achieve? For me, it's to help improve the quality of health for American Indian communities. If you wish to contact me, I've provided my email, or if you wish to know more about Kirka, the general contact information is provided. Thank you very much for your time, and at this time, we will take any questions.
Wyatt?
Yep.
Hi, this is Dr. Belcher. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great presentation. I'm here with the Ferguson Fellows, and we're just listening to your presentation, so we really appreciate your thoughtful approach.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You all want to say hi?
Hi. Hi. Do you guys have any questions at all?
Can you hear Wyatt?
So I got parts of that, but I don't think I fully got all of it.
Sloan's coming up to the mic. Just a second. I'm going to have her, because it was kind of a long question. It was. Hi, Wyatt.
Hi.
I was wondering if you feel like whoever the researcher is has an impact on how the population responds about the research being done, whether they're part of that particular tribe or if they're of another minority group. And then my second part of the question was, do you feel like the relationship is getting better?
So good question. I certainly think that who the researcher is impacts some of the work that's done, but really I think what matters most is again that the relationship that's built between the community and the researcher. So if you go in and you're respectful of the community, the culture that's there, and you really work with the community to find out what it is that they feel is best for them, then I don't think that it matters as much. But yeah, and so I think overall it's the environment is becoming better between researchers and communities, but again, it's really going to be based on each tribe because they have their own experience. So yeah.
That has to be respected. Just like any community, the historical trauma or the historical benefits have to be respected. So again, I guess the point that you were making is that it gets down to communication and relationship building.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
All right, we do have a question from online. The question is, I'm wondering about research that doesn't happen within tribal communities, but that involves Native Americans. What are your thoughts on approaching this type of research?
So that's a good question as well, because there's a lot of research that can occur off reservation or that's not within a native community, but involves a good number of native individuals, and that kind of research still needs to be handled in the same way. Just because a native person is not within that community or is somewhere else, they still need to be treated with that same respect, and it could sometimes be even more tricky to do a study that has native individuals off reservation or outside the community, because there's multiple reservations or communities that could be represented within that one study, and so you have to really kind of look at who is within that and make sure that you're covering all aspects of respecting the information that's gathered and used, and really respecting that individual and the community that they come from.
Another question from online. What has been the most surprising or helpful thing you have learned from your involvement in research?
I think the most surprising thing that I've learned from my experience is, there's a couple things. Is, again, I talked a little bit about how much or how little that I actually knew about research. So I thought it was just working in the lab and doing that microscope work and stuff like that. But it's so much more than that. There's so many other types of research out there, and that was one of the reasons that I was really interested in doing a webinar on this, because you don't have to be interested in just science or healthcare. There's other types of research that's out there. One of the things that when I talked with other students from when I was at USD was that many times there would be students in like PT or OT, and I'd be talking about research, and they were so set on going into that field, but it was almost like they pushed it off to the side. They said, I'm not going to do research because I'm already set with what I'm going to do. But the point that I wanted to make to them was that you can still be in that field and do research, because and it's kind of nice to have that as a backup in case things don't work out the way that you expect them, or you may end up liking research in that field more than just working in that field. The other thing that I found to be really interesting was the amount of work and knowledge that you have to have on, again, the history. There's so much out there that you have to know about the communities that you're working with, and past research that's been done, because it is so extensive that you really have to kind of be up to date on what's already out there, and what you can really bring to the table that's unique, and something that isn't done yet.
Another question online. What would you say to a researcher who is interested in research with American Indians but isn't sure where to start?
I would say that really try to focus on an area that you find interesting. Find a topic that you're interested in, and then again search for a mentor that aligns with the interests you have, and really it's going to be going from there, and kind of taking those next steps of moving forward with the research that you want to do, and getting involved. Because once you have an interest area, then you can find out what you're able to do at the stage that you're in. Especially being a student, it's kind of difficult on where to go and what to do, and a mentor can really help you kind of navigate the world of research. Does anyone else have any questions at all?
We have one more
Wyatt,
on.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh. Well, I was going to ask Wyatt, so what are the next steps for you as far as you and your research career?
So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm currently working with Stanford Research while I apply for graduate school. And so I'm looking into public health and hopefully I'll be going into a master's for public health or a DRPH. So there's quite a few different schools that I'm looking at across the country. But really, after that, then I'd hope to work with different Native communities to help develop different prevention programs, specifically for cancer. But, we'll kind of see where the road takes me and go from there.
That's really great. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Another online question. How can we better encourage our Native students to get involved in research?
That's a very, very good question because throughout my college career, I have always struggled with how to get other students involved in things that I felt were important. And I think the first step to getting there is bringing awareness or showing and talking to students about what it is that drives you to like why, kind of like this webinar, why is research important, and I felt that kind of telling my story would help to kind of empower other students to think about their own lives and how they could impact their communities. So really kind of getting to that personal level with the student and getting them interested in showing them the benefits that research can provide, or anything that an education can provide. It doesn't necessarily even have to be research, just what is it that an education can do for you and your community. Other questions at all? All right. Well, if not, if you think of any questions, again, feel free to email me, contact me, and let me know. I'll be happy to answer them or talk further about my experience. So thank you again for attending our webinar, and have a great day.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Thanks.
Hi, Wyatt. I have a question.
Oh, Go ahead.
How the IRB can be really daunting for students to complete. How would you suggest that we could get them involved in the IRB or to complete the IRB? Because all of those modules in that can be really overwhelming for them as students.
Yeah, so even at the point that I'm at, the IRB process is quite intense. So I definitely don't think that it's something that students should tackle on their own, but I think really maybe if it's something that they can learn about together, there's another part of Kirka is we're going to be working to develop some trainings that are more of basic level, and that goes into it, and really kind of tries to teach the process of going through an IRB, and so hopefully that will help to kind of simplify the process and get to the basics, so they at least have some knowledge of how to get through that, and provide some resources on where they can get more help and everything in navigating that. But again, one of my biggest points is to really find a mentor and find someone that's done this for a while, because that's going to be a huge help, because they've already been through that process and can provide a lot of feedback on if you have a submission to do, and they can read through it and let you know on what can be improved.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you again for attending the webinar. Have a great day.